Greed, however, is a disease that corrodes the soul. The grandson, unable to believe his cruel plan could fail, decided to return. He wanted to be sure, to see with his own eyes the tragic end he himself had orchestrated. But the lion, once merely a silent guardian, rose. Its eyes, previously calm, now burned with an ancestral fury. With a swift, powerful movement, the white beast ripped the tire from the grandson's car, tearing metal and rubber as if they were paper. The vehicle shrieked, careened, and stopped abruptly, the grandson trapped in his own private hell, terrified not by death, but by the impossibility of escaping the savage justice that watched him. The grandmother, still blind, was safe, warmed by the invisible presence of her protector, while the grandson faced the terror of a destiny he himself had invoked. The silence that followed the metallic shriek of the car was more deafening than any noise. The grandson, his heart pounding like a frantic drum in his chest, was paralyzed. His wide eyes fixed on the colossal white shape that now stood before him, a wall of muscle and fury. The albino lion was no longer a distant vision or a delusion. It was real, tangible, and its presence was the personification of the most primitive terror. The air inside the vehicle grew thick, heavy with the smell of burnt rubber and the cold sweat of fear. The grandson tried to breathe, but his lungs seemed to have forgotten how. His trembling hand reached for the key in the ignition, turning it desperately. The engine coughed, sputtered, but wouldn't catch. The front tire, now a mangled mass of twisted metal and shredded rubber, was irrefutable proof of the creature's supernatural strength. There was no escape. The road, once a path to freedom and wealth, had become his private prison. Outside, the lion, its white coat reflecting the dying light of dusk, seemed carved from the very rock of justice. Its eyes, once calm, now glowed with a golden intensity, fixed on the grandson, as if they could see through flesh and bone, straight into the soul corroded by greed. There was no hatred in those eyes, only an unwavering determination, a silent promise that impunity would have no place there. The grandson, in a fit of panic, began to pound on the steering wheel, screaming unintelligible words that were lost in his dry throat. He looked at the passenger seat, where the bag with his grandmother's money lay, a cruel reminder of his betrayal. That money, which promised a life of luxury, now seemed cursed, a dead weight dragging him further into his despair. He tried to open the door, but the lion took a step forward, a low, guttural growl vibrating in the air, making the car's metal tremble. It was a clear warning. Any reckless movement would be met with the fury of nature. Meanwhile, a few yards away, the blind grandmother felt the change in the environment. The sudden silence, the absence of her grandson's car engine, the cold night breeze beginning to fall. But above all, she felt the presence, that warm, soft mass that had nestled against her, a comforting heat that dispelled the cold and fear. It wasn't human, she knew, but it emanated a protection so pure that her soul, once shattered, began to mend. She extended a hesitant hand, feeling the silky texture of the fur, the contained strength beneath the muscles. A shiver ran through her body, not of dread, but of a strange and profound gratitude. She couldn't see, but she felt the majesty of the creature, the guardian that destiny, or perhaps something more divine, had sent to her. The grandson, trapped in his bubble of terror, could barely process the scene. He saw the lion turn for an instant, its golden eyes casting a glance at the grandmother, before returning to him. That look was a blow stronger than any paw. It was confirmation that he was not the primary target of that fury, but rather an obstacle to the peace of that helpless woman. The lion did not want to kill him, not yet. It wanted the grandson to feel the weight of his guilt, to experience the despair of his victim. Night advanced and shadows deepened, swallowing the deserted road. The lion, with calculated slowness, began to circle the car, its steps silent on the packed earth. Each movement was torture for the grandson, who followed the beast with his eyes, his neck stiff, his body tense. He could hear the rustle of grass beneath the animal's paws, the sound of its deep, steady breathing. The lion stopped beside the driver's window, so close that the grandson could see the details of its whiskers, the moisture on its muzzle. A low growl, almost a threatening purr, vibrated against the glass, making the grandson shrink further into the seat. The beast then moved away, not to leave, but to position itself directly in front of the car, completely blocking the road. Its eyes, now brighter in the growing darkness, were beacons of relentless justice. The grandson was trapped, with no way out, no hope. His only company was the echo of his own demons and the imposing presence of that white lion, a guardian angel for the grandmother and a silent executioner for him. The money, once so coveted, now seemed an unbearable burden, the price of his soul. He was at the mercy of a force that defied logic, a savage punishment he never imagined possible. What would come next? The question hung in the air, as cold and sharp as a guillotine blade. The air inside the vehicle, already thin, seemed to suck the last drop of sanity from him. The grandson, his heart pounding like a frantic drum, tried to close his eyes, but the image of the shredded tire, of the imposing white beast, was etched onto his eyelids. The smell of burnt rubber and gasoline mingled with the cold sweat that trickled down his forehead, salty and bitter. He was trapped not just in the car, but in a vivid nightmare, where nature, in its wildest and purest form, had risen to judge him. Every shadow danced with the image of the lion, every rustle of the wind transformed into a menacing growl in his disturbed mind. With each erratic beat of his heart, a new wave of panic engulfed him. He looked at the money, the stack of bills that should have been his salvation. Now it seemed like a shroud, a testament to his condemnation. That paper, once so desired, was now just a cruel reminder of the price of his soul. He tried once more to turn the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, a weak and pathetic sound that only underscored his impotence. The lion outside seemed to observe his every movement, every tremor, every sigh of despair, like a predator toying with its prey before the final strike. The lion, a living statue of muscle and white fur, did not move. Its golden eyes, however, were beacons of uninterrupted vigilance, penetrating glass and flesh, straight into the grandson's corroded soul. There was no haste in its movements, only a cold certainty, a patience that transcended time. It did not roar, did not attack, but its presence was a torture more refined than any physical violence. It was the waiting, the anticipation of the inevitable that gnawed at the grandson from within, minute by minute, in an eternity of dread. Meanwhile, a few yards away, the blind grandmother remained in her bubble of peace. The warmth of the lion, which still rested partially beside her, was a balm for her soul. She did not understand the fury unfolding, the silent battle between the beast and her grandson. For her, there was only comfort, the security of a protective presence that enveloped her like an invisible cloak. She extended her hand again, her fingers finding the soft, dense fur, feeling the contained strength within the creature. A faint, almost imperceptible smile appeared on her wrinkled lips. It was a smile of gratitude, of renewed faith in goodness, even amidst the darkness that surrounded her. She did not know, but the lion, with an almost imperceptible movement of its head, had brushed its muzzle against her hand, a gesture of affection and recognition that the grandson, in his torment, could never even imagine. The grandson, unable to bear the inaction, the agonizing weight any longer, had a flash of madness. His eyes swept the car's interior, searching for anything, any object that could serve as a weapon or distraction. He saw the heavy metallic jack in the trunk. An insane idea, but the only one that occurred to him, took shape in his disturbed mind. With an abrupt movement, he tried to open the car door. The lion, as if anticipating his intention, stepped forward, its golden eyes fixed on the grandson's. A low but deep growl reverberated in the air, more a warning than a threat. The grandson froze, hand on the handle, body tense. He knew one wrong move would be his end. But despair was a cruel master, and the idea of remaining there at the mercy of the beast was even more terrifying. He retreated, but did not give up. His eyes, now fixed on the lion, began to search for a weakness, a vulnerable point. But the creature was perfect in its majesty, an impenetrable fortress. Night deepened, and the temperature dropped. But the grandson's cold sweat did not subside. The lion then did something unexpected. It moved, not to attack, but to sit, majestic and imposing, directly in front of the car. Its eyes, however, did not stray from the grandson. It was a sentinel's pose, a guardian's, but also a judge's, a living monument to savage justice. Silence returned, heavier and more oppressive than before. Only the sound of wind whispering through the trees and the frantic beating of the grandson's heart broke the stillness. He felt the lion's gaze, an invisible pressure that crushed him. It was as if the beast was reading his soul, stripping bare each of his sins, each of his cruel intentions. The money on the passenger seat seemed to vibrate with a malignant energy, a magnet for misfortune. The grandmother, in turn, felt the lion settle down again, its warm body radiating a peace that contrasted brutally with her grandson's private hell. She sighed, a soft, tranquil sound, and nestled a little closer to the creature. For her, the world had become a place of uncertainty and darkness, but that presence, that warmth, was the only certainty left to her. The grandson, observing the scene through the windshield fogged by his own breath, felt a knot in his throat. The image of his grandmother, whom he had abandoned to die, now being protected by a wild creature, was a mirror of his own monstrosity. The lion was not just an animal. It was the personification of justice, of retribution, a guardian angel for the innocent and a demon for the guilty. He tried to turn on the radio, any sound to break the oppressive silence, but the car was dead. The battery, perhaps, or the impact of the ripped tire had damaged something more. He was completely isolated, without communication with the outside world, at the mercy of the beast and his own torturous thoughts. The hours would drag on, he knew, each minute an eternity of fear and regret. The lion, with its savage patience, was only beginning its judgment. What would it do? The question echoed in the grandson's mind, unanswered, hopeless. He was on the edge of the abyss, and the albino lion was the only one preventing him from falling, but also the only one pushing him. The night's cold penetrated the car's metal, but the cold in his soul was far more intense. The night's cold, once merely an uncomfortable sensation, now seeped into the grandson's bones, a physical punishment added to the mental torture. Each passing minute was an eternity of ice and dread. The air inside the car, heavy and stagnant, seemed to suck the oxygen from him, making every breath an effort. He tried to rub his hands, but his fingers were numb, his skin prickling. The lion, outside, remained motionless, a white sphinx in the darkness, its golden eyes like living embers, burning through the glass straight into his soul. There was no longer the explicit fury, the menacing growl, the paw tearing the tire. Now there was only silent vigilance, the calculated patience of a predator that knows its prey has nowhere to go. It was the waiting that was driving him mad, the certainty that the final blow would come, but not knowing when or how. The grandson's mind, already fragile, began to play tricks on him. Shadows danced at the edges of his vision, transforming into grotesque shapes, into accusing faces. The whisper of the wind in the distant trees seemed to carry voices, echoes of his own conscience, screaming his guilt. He looked at the passenger seat, where the money rested, an indecent pile of green bills. Before, it was the promise of freedom, of a life without worries. Now, it was the symbol of his ruin, the weight of a condemnation that could not be paid. He hated it, hated every bill, every cent that had led him to that hell. If he could, he would throw it all out the window, but he knew it would be useless. The lion was not there for money, but for justice. Thirst began to tighten his throat, a cruel reminder of his vulnerability. His mouth dry, his tongue rough, he had no water, no food. He was completely at the mercy of nature and the creature that represented it. Despair deepened, transforming into a cold, creeping panic. He tried to scream, but his voice failed, caught in his throat. Only a hoarse, pathetic sound escaped, swallowed by the oppressive silence of the night. Meanwhile, a few yards away, the blind grandmother slept, a deep, tranquil sleep, cradled by the warmth and presence of the lion. She did not feel the biting cold, did not hear her grandson's silent screams. For her, the world had transformed into a sanctuary, a safe haven in the arms of an unexpected guardian. The lion, with a gentle movement, had adjusted its position, lying closer to her, its soft, warm body acting as a shield against the night's cold. Its golden eyes, however, never strayed from the car, from the man inside. It was an impressive duality, the gentle protector and the relentless judge. The grandson, through the fogged windshield, could see the scene. His grandmother, whom he had abandoned without remorse, now rested in peace, protected by the same beast that held him prisoner. The image was a mirror of his own depravity, a constant reminder of his cruelty. A solitary tear trickled down his face, not of genuine repentance, but of self-pity, of anger at his own helplessness. He had underestimated the world, life, and nature's ability to rise in defense of the innocent. He tried once more to find a way out. His eyes swept the car's interior, searching for anything, any detail that might offer a glimmer of hope. The steering wheel, the pedals, the dashboard, everything seemed useless, broken, lifeless. The door was blocked by the lion and the window. He dared not imagine what would happen if he tried to break it. The beast was fast, strong, and he knew he wouldn't stand a chance. The lion, as if sensing the grandson's internal turmoil, made a subtle movement. Its head lifted slightly, golden eyes fixed, and a low, almost inaudible growl vibrated in the air. It was not a growl of attack, but of warning, a reminder that he was being watched, that every thought, every intention was perceived. The grandson froze, his breath caught in his throat. The sound was like thunder in his mind, a clear warning that its patience was running out. Night advanced, and the moon, now high in the sky, bathed the road in a silvery, ghostly light. The albino lion, under this light, seemed even more ethereal, a mystical creature, a phantom of justice. The grandson felt the weight of every second, every erratic beat of his heart. He was trapped in a private purgatory, where time stretched infinitely, and his only company was his own fear and the imposing presence of the white beast. He closed his eyes, trying to push away the images, the thoughts, but it was useless. The darkness behind his eyelids was even more vivid, filled with the image of the lion, with his grandmother's face, with the echoes of his own deeds. He was being judged, not by a court of men, but by a primordial force, a law of nature he had defied. And the sentence, he knew, would be as savage and relentless as the judge who pronounced it. What would come next? The question, once a whisper, was now a silent scream in his mind, unanswered. Only cold, fear, and waiting. The question echoed, a silent scream in the grandson's mind, as night deepened, painting the world a dark, almost black blue. What would come next? The answer remained suspended in the icy air, as unattainable as the starlight that now dotted the firmament with cosmic indifference. The cold, once merely an uncomfortable sensation, transformed into an insidious torture, penetrating the car's thin layer of metal and glass, seeping into his bones, paralyzing his muscles. Every breath was an effort. The dense, stagnant air inside the vehicle seemed to steal his oxygen, leaving a metallic, bitter taste in his mouth. He tried to curl up, pulling his knees to his chest, hugging himself in a pathetic attempt to retain the warmth his body no longer produced. His teeth chattered uncontrollably, a macabre rhythm that joined the frantic beating of his own heart. His fingers were numb, his toes insensitive, and the skin on his arms prickled with a constant chill. Outside, the lion remained motionless, a white sphinx in the darkness, its golden eyes like living embers, burning through the glass straight into his soul. There was no longer the explicit fury, the menacing growl, the paw tearing the tire. Now, there was only silent vigilance, the calculated patience of a predator that knows its prey has nowhere to go. It was the waiting that was driving him mad, the certainty that the final blow would come, but not knowing when or how. The grandson's mind, already fragile, began to play tricks on him. Shadows danced at the edges of his vision, transforming into grotesque shapes, into accusing faces. The whisper of the wind in the distant trees seemed to carry voices, echoes of his own conscience, screaming his guilt, repeating his grandmother's unspoken words, the broken promises, the years of neglect. He looked at the passenger seat, where the money rested, an indecent pile of green bills. Before, it was the promise of freedom, of a life without worries. Now, it was the symbol of his ruin, the weight of a condemnation that could not be paid. He hated it, hated every bill, every cent that had led him to that hell. If he could, he would throw it all out the window, but he knew it would be useless. The lion was not there for money, but for justice, for a law older and more relentless than any human code. The grandson, through the windshield fogged by the condensation of his own breath and unshed tears, could see the scene. His grandmother, whom he had abandoned without remorse, now rested in peace, protected by the same beast that held him prisoner. The image was a mirror of his own depravity, a constant reminder of his cruelty. A solitary tear trickled down his face, not of genuine repentance, but of self-pity, of anger at his own helplessness. He had underestimated the world, life, and nature's ability to rise in defense of the innocent. The night did not yield. It was a frigid eternity, suspended between dusk and a dawn that seemed never to arrive. The grandson, huddled in the car seat, felt every fiber of his body scream. The cold, once an annoyance, had transformed into a relentless enemy, sucking the warmth from his bones, causing his muscles to contract in painful spasms. His teeth chattered uncontrollably, a dry, constant sound that echoed in his own head, mingling with the growing hum in his ears. Thirst was a burning ember in his throat, turning his mouth into a desert of fine sand, his tongue rough and swollen, sticking to the roof of his mouth. Every attempt to swallow was an ordeal, a cruel reminder of his vulnerability. He tried to move his fingers, but the numbness was almost complete, as if his hands had turned into blocks of ice. His feet were insensitive, and the pain in his back and neck was searing, a result of the tense, hunched posture for hours on end. Physical exhaustion was overwhelming, but fear, a perverse stimulant, prevented his eyes from closing for more than a few seconds. Each time his eyelids grew heavy, the image of the albino lion, with its golden eyes, flashed in his mind, a terror that brought him back to the brutal reality. The grandson's mind, already on the verge of collapse, began to play even crueler tricks on him. Shadows inside the car danced, transforming into menacing shapes. The reflection of the dashboard on the windshield seemed like his grandmother's face, distorted into an expression of pain and condemnation. He heard whispers, indistinct voices that seemed to come from all sides, accusing him, mocking his misfortune. Was it madness, or were they the ghosts of his own conscience, finally unleashed to haunt him? He looked at the passenger seat, at the pile of money that had once represented his salvation. Now it was a mountain of worthless paper, a tangible reminder of the price of his betrayal. His hatred for those bills grew, a visceral hatred that surpassed even his fear of the lion. If he could, he would tear them into 1,000 pieces, burn them, make them disappear. But he was paralyzed, trapped in his own prison of metal and glass, under the relentless gaze of the white judge. Through the fogged windshield, he could see the scene that tormented him more than any other. A few yards away, his grandmother slept deeply, a sleep of innocence and peace. The albino lion, a mountain of muscle and white fur, remained lying beside her, its body serving as a shield against the cold, its presence a cloak of security. It was an image of serenity amidst his private hell, a contrast so shocking it made him feel nauseous. The woman he had abandoned to die was now protected by a wild beast, while he, the grandson, his own flesh and blood, was held captive by the same creature. The irony was a bitter poison in his mouth. A new wave of despair hit him, deeper and colder than any other. He could no longer think of an escape, a plan. Hope had vanished, replaced by a grim resignation. He was there to be judged, and the sentence was already being carried out slowly, cruelly, through the torture of cold, thirst, and solitude. The lion, as if perceiving its prisoner's downward spiral, made an almost imperceptible movement. Its golden eyes, which before seemed merely to watch, now seemed to pierce his soul, reading every thought, every regret, or lack thereof. There was no explicit anger, only a cold, unwavering determination. It was the personification of savage justice, of the law of the jungle he had ignored when trying to get rid of his grandmother. The grandson tried to scream again, but his voice was only a hoarse whisper, a pathetic sound, lost in the oppressive silence of the night. The air inside the car seemed thin, and the pressure in his ears increased, as if he were sinking into an abyss. His head throbbed with a dull but constant pain, and his vision began to seriously blur. Distant city lights, if they existed at all, were only indistinct blurs on the horizon, a cruel reminder of a world he had left behind, and which now seemed unattainable. He closed his eyes, but the darkness brought no relief. On the contrary, it filled with vivid images. His grandmother's face, the glow of the lion's eyes, his car's torn tire, the money he had stolen. It was a waking nightmare, an endless torment. He was on the verge of madness, feeling sanity slip through his fingers like sand. The night seemed to stagnate, each second stretching into an eternity. The cold intensified, thirst became unbearable, and the pain in his body was constant. The question that echoed in his mind at the beginning of the night, what would come next, now transformed into a silent lament. When will this end? But there was no answer. Only the cold, the fear, the waiting, and the relentless certainty that morning, if it came, would bring no salvation, but perhaps only a new chapter of his punishment. He was surrendered, completely at the mercy of nature and its white guardian, awaiting a destiny he himself had forged. Each beat of his heart was a ticking clock he couldn't see, but felt in every cell of his being, drawing him closer to an end he dared not imagine. The moonlight, now almost at its zenith, bathed the scene in a spectral glow, transforming the lion into an even more mystical figure, an angel of death or redemption, depending on which side of the road one stood. And for the grandson, it was undoubtedly the former. The night, which before seemed to stagnate, now twisted and writhed, a living, icy entity that squeezed the grandson in its deadly embrace. Every fiber of his body cried out for relief, but relief was a mirage in his desert of despair. The cold had seeped into his bones, transforming them into stalactites of pain. His muscles, once tense, now trembled uncontrollably, violent spasms shaking his body like a stringless puppet. Thirst was a bonfire in his throat, consuming what little moisture remained, while his tongue, rough and swollen, felt like sandpaper against the roof of his mouth. He tried to lick his cracked lips, but the movement was an ordeal, his skin tearing in small, painful fissures. Exhaustion was a heavy veil covering his eyes, but fear, a cruel master, refused to let him sleep. Each time his eyelids grew heavy, the image of the albino lion, with its golden eyes, flashed in his mind, a terror that brought him back to the brutal reality, to his prison of metal and glass. His mind, already fragile, began to fragment. Whispers became clear voices, calling his name, reprimanding him, laughing at his misery. He saw faces in the shadows, distorted figures moving at the corner of his vision, extending skeletal hands toward him. Were they the ghosts of his conscience, or madness finally claiming its prey? Through the fogged windshield, the scene that tormented him more than any other remained unchanged. A few yards away, his grandmother slept deeply, a sleep of innocence and peace, her aged face softened by the moonlight. The albino lion, a mountain of muscle and white fur, remained lying beside her, its body serving as a shield against the cold, its presence a cloak of security. It was an image of serenity amidst his private hell, a contrast so shocking it made him feel nauseous. The woman he had abandoned to die was now protected by a wild beast, while he, the grandson, his own flesh and blood, was held captive by the same creature. The irony was a bitter poison in his mouth, corroding him from within. The moonlight, now almost at its zenith, bathed the scene in a spectral glow, transforming the lion into an even more mystical figure, an angel of death or redemption, depending on which side of the road one stood. And for the grandson, it was, undoubtedly, the former. But then, a new sound, subtle, almost inaudible, broke the oppressive silence. A growl. Not the warning growl he already knew, but a different sound, deeper, more primal. It seemed to come from within the lion, a tremor that vibrated in the air and through the car's metal, hitting the grandson in his chest. It was a sound that spoke of hunger. And then the lion moved. Slowly, majestically it rose, its golden eyes never leaving the grandson, and stretched its body, muscles rippling under the white skin like waves in a sea of snow. The grandson held his breath, his heart pounding erratically. What would come next? The lion, with a fluid movement, turned its head and looked at the grandmother, who still slept peacefully. A soft sound, almost a purr, escaped its throat, and it leaned in, giving a gentle lick to the old woman's wrinkled hand. Then, with the same calculated slowness, it turned back to the car, to the grandson, and a new growl, stronger now, more assertive, echoed in the night. It was no longer a warning, it was a declaration, and the grandson, in his state of stupor and terror, finally understood. The lion was not just guarding the grandmother, it was waiting, and the wait, he knew, was about to end. The lion's declaration, a growl that vibrated with an ancestral hunger, was not just a sound, it was a sentence. For the grandson, trapped in the metallic carcass of his car, it was as if the very air had solidified, crushing him. What he had understood was that the lion was not just a guardian, it was a judge, and the execution of the sentence was about to begin. Fear, which until then had been a constant companion, transformed into a chilling panic, sharper than the night's cold. His eyes, already blurred by exhaustion and terror, fixed on the imposing figure that stood before him. The albino lion, a mountain of muscle and white fur, began to move. Not with the haste of an attack, but with the calculated deliberation of a predator that has its prey cornered. It did not run, it paraded. Each paw, soft and enormous, touched the asphalt with a silent, almost ghostly grace. The sound was minimal, a soft scrape that, to the grandson, sounded like war drums in his head. The leonine animal circled the car, its golden eyes beacons in the darkness, sweeping every inch of the vehicle, and, more importantly, every inch of the man inside. The grandson tried to retreat, but there was nowhere to go. He was glued to the seat, every muscle tense, waiting for the blow he knew would come. The voices in his head, once distorted whispers, now screamed. They called him a coward, a monster, a fool. He saw his grandmother's face in every shadow the lion cast, a face that seemed to weep, but also to judge. The money on the passenger seat seemed to glow with an unhealthy sheen, each bill a silent accusation, a tangible reminder of what he had traded for his soul. The lion stopped, not in front nor behind, but beside the driver. A few inches from the window, the animal's enormous head rose, and its eyes, once merely watchful, now seemed to pierce the glass, the bodywork, the very flesh and bone of the grandson. The lion's warm, heavy breath fogged the glass, a dense mist that separated predator from prey, but also served as a curtain for the spectacle of terror unfolding. The grandson could see the white whiskers, thick as wires, and the texture of the skin around the muzzle, so close it seemed palpable. A new growl, lower now, but with a guttural resonance that made the entire car tremble, escaped the lion's throat. It was not a growl of explicit anger, but a sound of warning, of possession, and of a patience that was wearing thin. And then the lion made a move. Slow, deliberate, one of its front paws rose. It was an enormous paw, with retractable claws that the grandson knew were capable of tearing metal and flesh with equal ease. The paw touched the driver's window glass, not with force, but with a gentle pressure, almost a test. The grandson let out a muffled cry, a sound lost in his own parched throat. He could feel the vibration of the paw through the glass, through the steering wheel, through his own bones. It was a touch that promised pain, a silent threat that was infinitely more terrifying than any direct attack. The paw remained there for an instant, a constant reminder of his vulnerability, of the fragile barrier that separated him from the beast. The grandson's mind was in tatters. He saw flashes of his life, moments when he could have been different, moments when he could have chosen kindness instead of cruelty, but they were just mirages, ghosts of a past he had destroyed. The reality was the lion, the cold, the thirst, the pain, and the certainty that his time was running out. The lion withdrew its paw, and the grandson exhaled the breath he hadn't realized he was holding. But the relief was ephemeral. The beast did not move away. Instead, it lowered its head, and the grandson felt a shiver run down his spine. The lion began to sniff the driver's door handle, a damp, heavy sound. The animal's muzzle brushed the metal, and the grandson could hear the sounds of the lion's deep breathing, air being inhaled and exhaled with a force that seemed capable of sucking the life out of him. He couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't even blink. His eyes were fixed on the lion, awaiting the inevitable. Would it be the door, the glass? What would the lion do? The wait was a torture more excruciating than any physical pain. Each second stretched, an eternity of dread. Then the lion made a sound, not a growl but a low grunt, almost a huff, as if dissatisfied. And in a surprising movement, it moved away from the door, stepping back. The grandson felt a pang of hope, a faint spark in his despair. Would this be the end? Would the lion leave him in peace? But hope was crushed the next instant. The lion turned, and its golden eyes fixed again on the passenger seat, on the money, the stack of bills the grandson had stolen, which he had used as currency for his soul, was now under the beast's penetrating gaze. The lion tilted its head slightly, as if evaluating the object, understanding its meaning, and then, with a swift, powerful movement, the lion slammed its front paw onto the car's hood. It wasn't a direct attack on the window, but a blow that made the entire vehicle rock violently, as if struck by lightning. The sound of crumpling metal was deafening, a cry of pain from the car that echoed in the night. The grandson was thrown forward, his head hitting the steering wheel with a dull thud. Pain exploded in his temple, and his vision flickered to black for an instant. When consciousness returned, he was gasping, the taste of blood in his mouth. The car still trembled, and the lion was there, looking at him, its golden eyes gleaming with an intensity that seemed to say, "I'm not in a hurry. I have all the time in the world." The message was clear. The torture was not over. The wait was about to end, yes, but not in the way he expected. The lion would not kill him quickly. It would dismantle him, piece by piece, just as it was dismantling the car and the grandson's sanity. The night was still young, and the albino lion, the grandmother's guardian and the grandson's executioner, was only beginning its judgment. Pain exploded in the grandson's temple, an infernal symphony of buzzing and throbbing that echoed in his skull. The metallic taste of blood filled his mouth, warm and nauseating, a vivid reminder of the blow's brutality. His vision, which had flickered to black, now returned in distorted flashes, like an old damaged film. The car still trembled, a wounded animal under the attack of an incomprehensible force. And there it was, the albino lion, a living statue of power and judgment, its golden eyes fixed on the grandson, gleaming with an intensity that seemed to pierce not just metal and glass, but the very essence of his soul. "I'm not in a hurry. I have all the time in the world." The message was clear, burned into his shattered mind. The lion did not move immediately after the blow. It remained there, imposing, observing, like a sculptor evaluating its work before the next chisel stroke. For the grandson, each second of silence was an eternity of dread, a countdown to the next act of torture. He was trapped, not just in the car, but in a lucid nightmare from which there was no waking. His head throbbed, his body trembled uncontrollably, and a cold, deeper than the night's temperature, invaded him. A cold that came from within, from the recognition of his own insignificance before that mythical creature. Then the lion moved again, not with the explosion of violence the grandson expected, but with a deliberate, almost mocking slowness. It lowered its head, and the grandson felt an even more intense chill. The white muzzle, with its thick whiskers, brushed the dented hood, sniffing the distorted metal as if appreciating the damage it had caused. Then, with a movement that seemed impossible for an animal of its size, the lion slid its front paw over the surface of the hood, claws retracted, but the pressure was palpable, as if smoothing the wound it had just opened. It was a gesture of possession, of absolute dominance. But what came next was even more terrifying. The lion, with almost surgical precision, began to drag one of its claws, now extended, across the hood's bodywork, creating a sharp, screeching sound of tearing metal. It was not a furious attack, but a methodical deconstruction. A long, deep gash appeared, revealing peeled paint and bare metal beneath. Then another, and another. The lion was drawing, or rather, carving its message of destruction into the car's body. Each scratch was a stab to the grandson's heart, each sound of tearing metal a silent scream of his own sanity unraveling. The lion's eyes, however, never left the grandson's. It was a cruel game, a private spectacle of terror. The beast was dismantling the car, piece by piece, not to kill him quickly, but to prolong his agony, so that he would witness the destruction of his last refuge, the disintegration of his own existence. The grandson tried to scream, but his throat was dry and constricted. He tried to move, but his body seemed paralyzed by fear. He was a puppet, and the lion pulled the strings. The beast then moved away from the hood, but not far. Its golden eyes, beacons in the darkness, swept the car's interior, stopping again at the passenger seat. On the money, the pile of bills, once a symbol of his freedom and wealth, now seemed a burden, a curse. The lion tilted its head, and a low grunt, almost a murmur of disapproval, escaped its throat. It was as if the animal understood the perverse value of that paper, the price of the betrayal it represented. With a sudden movement, the lion turned and, with surprising force, bit the driver's side mirror. The sound of plastic and glass shattering was deafening, and the mirror detached, falling onto the asphalt with a dry thud. The grandson flinched, feeling the invisible shards of that act of violence. The beast did not feed, did not attack directly, but systematically destroyed every part of the car the grandson considered his protection. The night seemed to stretch into infinity. The moon, now in its decline, began to cast longer, distorted shadows. The air was heavy with the smell of crumpled metal and the lion's wild breath. The grandson was exhausted, physically and mentally. The pain in his head was constant, and thirst burned his throat. He knew he couldn't last much longer. With each new sound of destruction, each new movement of the lion, a part of his hope crumbled. He risked a glance at his grandmother. She still slept, serene, wrapped in the lion's white mantle, oblivious to the terror unfolding a few yards from her. The image was a brutal contrast. The peace of innocence against the agony of guilt. The lion, her guardian and executioner, seemed to have a clear purpose. It was not just protecting the old woman. It was purifying the world of an evil he represented. The lion, as if sensing the grandson's gaze, turned its head and stared at him again. A deep growl, which seemed to come from the depths of the earth, vibrated in the air. Then, with terrifying precision, the beast approached the driver's door again. This time, there were no gentle touches. There was a swift movement, and the grandson heard a loud snap, followed by the sound of metal bending. The lion had ripped off the door handle, not with anger, but with cold, calculated efficiency. The final barrier, the illusion of safety, was being dismantled. The lion was clearing the way, and the weight, he knew, was about to transform into an inevitable confrontation. The loud snap of the door handle being ripped off echoed in the car's cabin like a gunshot, a dry, final sound that sealed the grandson's fate. There were no more barriers, no more illusion of safety. The door, now a wounded piece of metal, was at the beast's mercy. An icy shiver, more intense than any cold he had ever felt, ran down his spine, freezing him in place. His eyes, wide and bloodshot, were fixed on the spot where the handle had been. Now an empty hole, an open invitation to the inevitable. The lion did not hesitate. With the same cold, calculated efficiency, it plunged one of its claws, sharp as razors, into the gap the handle had left. There was no haste, no uncontrolled fury, only relentless determination. The grandson could hear the sound of metal groaning, bending under the lion's immense paw strength. It was a sound of death, the final lament of his last hope. He tried to retreat, but there was nowhere to go. He was cornered, trapped in his own snare of cruelty. The door began to yield, slowly, painfully. It opened a few inches, revealing a dark, menacing slit. The lion's wild scent, a mixture of earth, fur, and something primordial, invaded the car, suffocating the grandson. He could feel the beast's warm, heavy breath through the opening, a visceral reminder of his tormentor's proximity. The grandson's heart pounded uncontrollably, a frantic drum in his chest, echoing the rhythm of his own annihilation. He closed his eyes for an instant, wishing it were all a nightmare, a feverish hallucination. But when he opened them again, the reality was even more brutal. The lion was there, its golden eyes gleaming in the darkness, watching him through the door's slit. There was no anger, no hatred, only an intensity that seemed to transcend any human emotion. It was primordial justice, embodied in white fur and powerful muscles. With a low growl, almost a warning, the lion pushed the door harder. The metal groaned in protest, and the door opened further, now revealing the animal's head, majestic and terrifying. The grandson could see every hair, every whisker, the moisture on its muzzle. The lion tilted its head, its eyes fixed on his, as if reading his soul, assessing the depth of his depravity. A desperate thought crossed the grandson's mind. The money. The pile of bills on the passenger seat. Was that what the lion wanted? Was it the reason for all this torture? With a last glimmer of hope, he reached out a trembling hand for the money, as if he could offer it as a sacrifice. But the lion did not move. Its eyes remained fixed on the grandson, and the growl in its throat deepened, a sound that seemed to come from deep within the earth. The beast was not interested in the money. It was not a matter of greed, but of retribution. The lion did not want the stolen wealth. It wanted the soul that stole it. Then the lion did something the grandson would never expect. Instead of entering the car to attack him, it stepped back, keeping the door open. Its golden eyes, however, did not leave him. It was an invitation, a silent command. "Get out!" The grandson hesitated. Getting out of the car meant facing the beast directly, without the protection, however fragile, of metal and glass. But staying inside was to prolong the agony, to witness the slow destruction of his refuge until there was nowhere left to run. He was caught between a rock and a hard place, between imminent terror and the certainty of death. The lion growled again, a stronger sound this time, making the air vibrate. It was an ultimatum. The grandson could feel cold sweat trickling down his forehead, mixing with the blood from his head wound. His throat was on fire, and his muscles trembled uncontrollably. He looked at his grandmother again, still serene in her lion-induced sleep, a cruel contrast to his own hell. Her image, protected by the same creature that terrified him, was the final proof of his guilt. With a sigh that seemed to tear his lungs, the grandson began to move. Slowly, painfully, he unbuckled his seatbelt. Every movement was a Herculean effort, every sound an echo of his own surrender. His eyes never left the lion's, which watched his every gesture with relentless attention. The beast was patient. It knew the grandson had nowhere to go. He pushed the door, which was now completely open, and the cold night air hit him, an icy shock that made him shiver. The lion's wild scent was overwhelming, filling his senses, dominating him. He put one foot out, then the other, feeling the rough asphalt under his shoes. The world spun, and his head throbbed with searing pain. He was out of the car, standing in the middle of the dark road, under the penetrating gaze of the albino lion. The beast was a few yards from him, a mountain of white fur and muscle, its golden eyes glowing like embers in the darkness. The grandson was exposed, vulnerable, with nothing between him and his executioner. The wait was over. The final judgment was about to begin. The lion took a step forward, and the grandson felt the ground tremble beneath his feet. The night, which before seemed infinite, now seemed to have reached its abrupt end. The night, which before seemed infinite, now seemed to have reached its abrupt end. The ground trembled beneath the grandson's feet as the lion took that step forward, not an aggressive advance, but a calculated movement that seemed to measure the distance between predator and prey. The road air, once merely cold, became dense, laden with the lion's wild scent, an intoxicating mixture of earth, fur, and primordial power that choked every last bit of oxygen from the grandson's lungs. He stood there, exposed, a tiny speck of flesh and bone under the vast darkness, with the albino beast rising before him like a living mountain of snow, its golden eyes fixed on him, burning like embers in an abyss. The grandson tried to retreat, but his feet seemed rooted to the asphalt. Every muscle in his body was in a state of painful contraction. paralyzed by a terror so absolute that it transcended physical pain itself. His mind, once a whirlwind of plans and excuses, was now a vacuum of pure panic, with no room for any thought beyond the imminent image of death. He could feel sweat trickling down his forehead, mixing with the dried blood from his wound, and the metallic taste of fear in his mouth. The lion did not attack. There was no furious roar, no sudden leap. Instead, the beast tilted its head slightly to the side, a gesture that, in a domestic animal, might be curiosity, but in the albino lion it was one of cold, terrifying intelligence. Its eyes expressed not anger, but a deep, ancient understanding, as if it were reading the history of the grandson's cruelty in every fiber of his being. A low growl, almost a murmur, escaped its throat, a sound that seemed to vibrate directly in the grandson's bones, making him tremble uncontrollably. Then, with a deliberate slowness that was more terrifying than any speed, the lion began to circle the grandson. It was not a hunting circle, but a ritual, a macabre dance of judgment. Each white, massive paw moved with a silent grace, but with each step, the ground seemed to vibrate, and the grandson felt the invisible weight of the lion's presence crushing him. He spun in place, trying to keep his eyes fixed on the beast, but with each turn, the world seemed to spin faster, and nausea rose in his throat. His desperate eyes swept the surrounding scene. The car, now a heap of twisted metal and shattered glass, looked like an open tomb. The grandmother, still asleep, wrapped in the lion's white fur, was a vision of peace that contrasted brutally with his own hell. The irony was a poison. The creature he feared and that was dismantling him was the same one offering solace and security to his victim. The lion stopped, its golden eyes fixed, not on the grandson, but on the car's interior, specifically the passenger seat, on the money. The pile of bills, once the peak of his ambition, now seemed like a pile of dry leaves, worthless. A mute testimony to his depravity. The grandson felt a chill. The lion had not forgotten. With a movement that was both gentle and powerful, the lion extended one of its front paws, not to attack the grandson, but to reach the passenger seat. Its claws, once used to tear metal, now moved with almost delicate precision. The grandson watched, hypnotized by horror, as the lion's paw closed over the pile of money. There was no strong grip, no tearing. The beast simply pulled the bills out of the car, as if removing an insignificant object. The bills fell onto the asphalt, scattering in a fan of pale colors under the faint moonlight. The lion then, with a slow, majestic movement of its head, looked at the grandson. Its eyes seemed to ask, "Is this what you value? Is this why you betrayed?" The grandson felt a knot in his throat. He wanted to scream, wanted to beg, but no words could escape. The lion then did the unthinkable. With a low grunt, almost a snort of contempt, it raised a paw, and with the soft but heavy pad of its paw, pushed the scattered bills. It did not tear them, did not bite them. It simply pushed them, one by one, to the side of the road, where the night wind caught them and dispersed them further, carrying them into the dark brush, into the ditch, into oblivion. The money, the reason for his cruelty, was being swept away, declared useless, worthless. It was an act of dispossession, not just physical but symbolic. The lion did not want the money. It wanted the grandson to witness the annihilation of everything he had stolen, of everything he had valued above life and love. The grandson felt an even greater void open in his chest, a hole where before there had been the hope of a life of luxury. The lion, having finished its demonstration of contempt for the money, turned its attention back to the grandson. Its golden eyes gleamed with renewed intensity, and the growl in its throat deepened. It took another step forward, and the grandson felt the beast's warm, heavy breath on his face. The scent was overwhelming, filling every pore, every cell of his body. There was nowhere left to run, nothing left to hide. The grandson stood naked before his judge, stripped of his car, his money, his dignity. The lion raised its majestic head, and a louder, deeper growl vibrated in the air, a sound that seemed to tear the very fabric of the night. The grandson closed his eyes, awaiting the final blow, the end of his agony. But the lion did not attack. It merely growled, and the sound was a promise, a threat, an ultimatum. The judgment was not over. It was only beginning. The grandson opened his eyes, not from courage, but from the inability to sustain the darkness that promised the end. The lion was still there, mere inches away, a wall of white fur against the dark night. Its golden eyes, once embers, now seemed like mirrors reflecting the grandson's own soul, exposing every stain, every betrayal. The growl which had torn the air subsided to a deep murmur, but no less menacing, a sound that seemed to vibrate directly in his bones, promising a pain that went beyond the physical. The final blow did not come. There were no claws tearing flesh, no fangs closing. The beast sought not a quick death, but a lesson, a retribution that would extend through time, corroding him from within. The lion took another step, but not towards him. Instead, the majestic creature slowly turned, presenting its back to the grandson for an instant, a gesture of contempt more humiliating than any attack. Its eyes, however, still caught him from the corner, a constant vigilance that allowed no escape. The beast moved towards the grandmother, who still rested serenely, nestled against its flank. The grandson watched, his heart pounding erratically, as the lion lowered its head and with its muzzle gently nudged the old woman, not to wake her, but to adjust her position, like a zealous guardian ensuring the comfort of its protected one. It was a scene of brutal tenderness, a contrast so stark with his own cruelty that the grandson's stomach churned. The beast then raised its head again, and its eyes fixed on the grandson. There was no fury in them now, but a kind of grim expectation. The lion let out a low growl, a sound that seemed to summon, to command. The grandson didn't know what was expected of him, but terror compelled him to obey. He took a hesitant step back, then another, but the lion shook its head, a subtle movement that seemed to say, "Not that way, this way." The lion's front paw rose, not in attack, but to point to the road ahead, the same dark, empty road where he had abandoned his grandmother. The grandson felt a chill run down his spine. The lion did not want to kill him there, not yet. It wanted him to walk. It wanted him to feel the weight of each step, the solitude of the road, the darkness he had imposed on his grandmother. It was a meticulous punishment, designed to inflict maximum psychological torment. The lion was forcing him to relive his crime, to walk in his victim's shoes, but with full awareness of the terror that awaited him. With trembling legs and a mind in a fog of panic, the grandson began to walk. Each step was an agony. The rough asphalt under his shoes seemed to burn. He looked back every few seconds, expecting an attack. But the lion followed him, maintaining a constant distance, its golden eyes like beacons in the darkness. The beast did not run, did not rush him. It merely watched him, a white, imposing shadow that was the personification of his judgment. The sound of his own footsteps on the empty road was the only noise besides the wind and the lion's occasional growl. With every yard he advanced, the image of his grandmother, blind and helpless, abandoned on that very road, became more vivid in his mind. He could almost feel the night's cold, the disorientation, the fear she must have felt. The lion was forcing him into a brutal, belated empathy, a forced understanding of the pain he had inflicted. The money, now scattered and worthless, seemed to mock him from afar, a pathetic reminder of his motivation. The grandson stumbled, almost falling, but managed to regain his balance. His head throbbed, and the wound on his forehead pulsed with every heartbeat. He was exhausted, physically and mentally broken. The road seemed endless, and the darkness ahead was an abyss of uncertainty. He did not know where the lion was leading him, nor what his final destiny would be. The only certainty was that there would be no mercy. The lion was no ordinary predator. It was an executor of justice, and its patience was as terrifying as its strength. He kept walking, the cold air scraping his throat, fear a constant taste in his mouth. With each step, hope diminished, replaced by a grim resignation. The lion, with its silent, imposing presence, had become his guide to hell. The moon, which before seemed a silent accomplice, now watched from above, indifferent to his torment. The grandson was alone, stripped of everything, walking towards a judgment he knew he deserved, but could never have imagined. The lion, his white tormentor, was the last link between him and total darkness, and he knew that when that link broke, it would be the end. He was just a piece on a cosmic chessboard, moved by the paw of a beast that represented nature's own wrath. The judgment was far from over. In fact, it was only beginning to unfold in its cruelest and most inevitable form. The road stretched ahead, a dark, endless ribbon, devouring the faint moonlight and spitting it back in distorted shadows. Each step was a stab, a cruel reminder of the distance he had traveled to commit his crime, and now of the distance he was forced to travel for his penance. The asphalt, once an indifferent surface, now seemed alive, burning under his feet, each pebble a needle piercing the sole of his shoes, or perhaps his very soul. The icy night air entered his lungs like shards of glass, and his dry throat scraped with every gasping breath. He didn't know how long he had been walking. Hours? Days? The notion of time had dissolved, replaced by an eternity of steps, of pain and terror. Exhaustion was a heavy cloak dragging him down, threatening to swallow him with every stumble. His head throbbed with searing pain, the wound on his forehead pulsing in sync with the erratic rhythm of his heart. The dried blood on his face, now hardened, seemed like a grotesque mask of his own misery. With every glance back, the sight of the albino lion was a constant. The beast did not run, did not rush him, merely followed, a white, majestic shadow that was the personification of his judgment. Its golden eyes, beacons in the darkness, seemed to pierce his mind, reading every thought, every regret, every remnant of his depravity. The lion's occasional growl was not a threat of imminent attack, but a constant reminder of its presence, a guttural sound that vibrated in his bones, promising a pain that went beyond the physical. The image of his grandmother, blind and helpless, abandoned on that very road, became more vivid with every yard. He could almost feel the night's cold on his skin, the disorientation, the silent panic she must have felt. The lion was forcing him into a brutal, belated empathy, a forced understanding of the pain he had inflicted. It was as if every step he took was a step she couldn't take, every yard a measure of his cruelty. The money, now scattered and worthless, seemed to mock him from afar, a pathetic reminder of his motivation, of his empty ambition. The luxury he had coveted, the freedom he had dreamed of, all had dissolved into dust and wind, swept away by the paw of a beast that valued not gold, but life and justice. The grandson stumbled again, this time falling to his knees on the rough asphalt. Pain radiated through his legs, but he barely felt it, for the pain in his soul was infinitely greater. He tried to get up, but his muscles were weak, trembling uncontrollably. His head spun, and the darkness ahead seemed to deepen, swallowing him. It was then that he heard it. A sound. Not the lion's growl, but another, a murmur, faint, almost inaudible, coming from the darkness ahead. He strained his eyes, trying to pierce the veil of night, but all he saw were dancing shadows. The sound repeated, a soft lament, a muffled cry. Panic mingled with exhaustion, creating a new wave of terror. What was that? Was the lion leading him into a trap, to another animal? Or was his mind, already fragile, beginning to play tricks? He looked back at the lion. The beast had stopped. Its golden eyes were fixed on the darkness ahead, in the same direction from which the sound came. There was no fury in them now, but a different intensity, a kind of alert. The lion took a step forward, then another, closing the distance between them. But it was not a movement of attack. It was a movement of guidance. The grandson felt an even deeper chill. The lion was not leading him to immediate death. It was leading him to something else, something that emitted that sound. With a superhuman effort, he managed to stand, his legs wobbly, his body protesting. The lion, with a low growl, almost a command, indicated with its head that he should continue. The sound ahead became clearer now, a mixture of lament and something that seemed like a dragging. The darkness began to yield, revealing indistinct contours. And then he saw. It was not an animal. It was not a trap. It was a figure, a human figure, fallen by the side of the road, slowly dragging itself. The grandson felt his blood run cold. The figure was small, hunched, and its movements were slow, painful, and then a ray of moonlight for a brief instant illuminated the figure's face. It was her, his grandmother. Not the grandmother asleep and protected by the lion near the car, but another grandmother, a phantom grandmother, or perhaps a manifestation of his own guilt. She was there, on the road, exactly where he had abandoned her, dragging herself, lost, blind, with empty eyes fixed on nothing. The lament he heard was hers. A soft, almost inaudible cry of despair and abandonment. She was trying to move, trying to find her way, but she was lost, disoriented, exactly as he had left her. The lion stopped beside the grandson, and its golden eyes fixed on the phantom grandmother, then returned to the grandson. There were no more growls, only a heavy silence laden with meaning. It was as if the beast was saying, "See what you did, see the pain you caused." The grandson felt his stomach churn, and nausea rose in his throat. It wasn't a ghost. It was a projection of his mind, a visual torment, a physical manifestation of his guilt. The lion was not leading him to a physical destiny, but to a confrontation with the brutal truth of his crime. He was being forced to witness, in real time, the agony he had inflicted. The phantom grandmother continued to drag herself, her lament filling the air, a sound that tore at the grandson's soul. He wanted to scream, wanted to run to her, wanted to beg for forgiveness, but his feet were nailed to the ground. The lion, his silent tormentor, kept him there, forcing him to watch, to absorb every detail of the scene. The punishment was not death. It was life. The life he had stolen from her, and the life he was now forced to live, tormented by the image of his own evil. The judgment was far from over. He had only plunged into a new circle of his personal hell, and with each step, each lament, each empty gaze from the phantom grandmother, he knew the pain would be eternal. The road had no end, and the torment even less so. The image of the grandmother, hunched and frail, dragging herself along the roadside, was a knife twisting in his chest. It was not a ghost in the ethereal sense, but a manifestation as real as the asphalt beneath his feet, a vivid and cruel projection of his own conscience. The lament that escaped her lips was not loud, but it resonated in his soul with the force of thunder. A sound he would never forget. It was the sound of abandonment, of disorientation, of the terror he himself had sown. He tried to scream, but his voice was caught in his throat, choked by a mixture of horror and self-loathing. He wanted to run, to hug her, to beg for forgiveness, but his feet were rooted to the ground as if an invisible force held him. The lion beside him remained motionless, a white statue of judgment. Its golden eyes, once beacons of fury, now gleamed with a cold, observant intensity, as if recording every detail of his agony, every tremor of his body, every unshed tear. The phantom grandmother continued her slow, painful dragging. Her hands, once soft and wrinkled, that had cradled him in infancy, were now caked with dirt and blood, scraping the asphalt with desperate determination. Her white hair, once carefully combed, was matted and full of debris. Her clothes, which he recognized as those she wore when he left her, were torn and soiled, a silent testament to the hellish journey she was being forced to relive. Every movement of hers was a stab. He could feel the night's cold penetrating his bones, the pain of exhausted muscles, the blindness that enveloped her in endless darkness. It was as if the lion had opened a portal to his crime, forcing him to walk in his victim's skin, to experience firsthand the extent of his cruelty. Nausea rose in his throat and he doubled over, his body trembling uncontrollably, but nothing came out. He was empty, drained of anything but guilt and dread. "Stop, Nge," he managed to whisper, his voice hoarse and almost inaudible. "Please stop." But the phantom grandmother did not stop. She continued, a spectre of pain and abandonment, dragging herself forward, always forward, toward an invisible abyss. Her lament became an echo in his mind, mingling with the voices of his own condemnation. He closed his eyes tightly, wishing the vision would disappear, that it was all a nightmare from which he could wake. But when he opened them again, she was still there, a relentless reminder that the reality of his crime was inescapable. The lion took a step forward, then another, not towards the grandmother, but towards him, closing the distance between them. There was no growl, only the heavy silence of its presence. The grandson felt the beast's warm breath on his face, the wild, pure scent that contrasted brutally with the rot of his own soul. The lion's golden eyes were inches from his, piercing him, not with anger, but with a deep, ancient understanding. It was as if the beast was reading every fiber of his being, every belated regret, every fragment of his lost humanity. And then, the lion did something unexpected. It tilted its head, and a soft sound, almost a purr, escaped its throat. It was not a sound of comfort, but of an unquestionable command. It was as if it were saying, "Look, feel, don't look away, don't dare to forget." The grandson felt an even greater wave of despair. He was trapped to this vision, trapped to this road, trapped to his white tormentor. The punishment was not a physical attack, not the quick death he might even wish for now. It was the slow, excruciating torture of his own conscience, amplified and projected before his eyes by the inscrutable power of the beast. He fell to his knees again, not from physical exhaustion, but under the unbearable weight of his guilt. Tears, which he thought were dry, began to stream down his face, mixing with the dried blood from his wound. They were tears of regret, of terror, of a pain he never knew he could feel. He extended a trembling hand towards the phantom grandmother, a futile and desperate gesture. "Grandma," he sobbed, his voice broken. "Forgive me, please." The phantom grandmother did not respond. She could not. She was the personification of his action, not a separate entity. She continued to drag herself, her soft lament filling the air, and with every inch she advanced, the grandson felt his heart break a little more. The lion, still by his side, was the guardian of this personal hell, ensuring he had no escape, not even in the darkest recesses of his mind. The road ahead was no longer just a dark ribbon. It was an infinite corridor of mirrors, each reflecting a facet of his crime, each echoing his grandmother's lament. The judgment was not an event, but a continuous process, a forced immersion into the darkness he had created. And the lion, with its silent, imposing presence, was the master of ceremonies, the guide to a torment that promised to be eternal, a hell built brick by brick with his own cruel choices. The night was long, and the penance even longer. The night was long and the penance even longer. The phantom grandmother's lament, a thread of almost imperceptible sound, wove itself into the darkness, enveloping the grandson in a shroud of guilt. He was on his knees, hands outstretched, body convulsing in dry sobs. "Grandma, please," he pleaded, his voice torn, but she did not stop. She continued to drag herself, a hunched figure of pain and abandonment, a cruel mirror of his own action. Her eyes, once empty, now seemed to carry the depth of all the world's suffering, fixed on an invisible point ahead. Her hands, which once caressed him, now scraped the asphalt with an agonizing friction, leaving behind a faint trail of dirt and perhaps blood. The grandson felt every scratch on his own skin, every tremor of exhaustion in her muscles. It was as if the lion, with its untold magic, had transposed her pain onto him, forcing him to experience the terror of his victim. The albino lion, still by his side, was the personification of silent justice. Its golden eyes, once filled with a protective fury, now gleamed with a cold calm. The calm of one who observes an inevitable process. There was no longer a need for growls or threats. The beast's presence was enough, an overwhelming weight that bound the grandson to that scene, to that agony. The phantom grandmother paused, her lament intensifying for a brief instant, as if a final sigh escaped her lips. The grandson held his breath, his heart pounding erratically. Was she dying again? Was he killing her again in his own mind? But then she moved again, a slow, painful drag, but with a new direction. She was no longer dragging herself forward into the abyss. She was turning around. Slowly, millimeter by millimeter, the hunched figure began to turn, her hands scraping the asphalt, her matted hair brushing the ground. The grandson watched, paralyzed by terror and anticipation. Where was she going? What did the lion want him to see now? And then she was facing him. Her eyes, once empty, now seemed to pierce him, not with anger, but with a sorrow so profound that the grandson felt his own chest empty. She extended a trembling hand towards him. It was not a gesture of forgiveness, nor of supplication. It was a gesture of recognition. A recognition of the pain, the betrayal, the emptiness. The grandson tried to extend his own hand to meet hers, to touch her, to apologize, but the phantom grandmother's hand passed through his, like smoke, like a dream, like the very unreality of his guilt. In that moment, the grandson felt his world truly collapse. There was no redemption, no forgiveness, not even touch. He was a ghost to her, just as she was a torment to him. Her lament became a silent scream in his mind, an eternal echo of his own cruelty. He fell face down on the asphalt, tears streaming, mixing with the dust and dried blood on his face. He punched the ground, the physical pain insignificant compared to the pain of his soul. "I killed you!" he screamed, his voice hoarse, pure and uncontrollable despair. "I killed you, Grandma. Forgive me, please forgive me." But the phantom grandmother did not react. She simply continued to extend her hand, her gaze of infinite sorrow fixed on him, a mute and relentless testimony. And then, as slowly as she had appeared, the figure began to fade. First, the edges became translucent, then the entire body, until she was merely a shimmering mirage in the cold night air. The lament diminished, becoming a distant whisper, and then disappeared completely. The grandson lay there, face down, his body trembling, his face pressed against the icy asphalt. Darkness returned to being just darkness, silence just silence. The phantom grandmother was gone, but her image, the pain, the lament, were etched in his mind. He had been forced to witness not only what he had done, but to experience the consequence of his action, to feel the emptiness of his own cruelty. The albino lion took a step forward, and the grandson felt the beast's warm breath on the back of his neck. He expected the final blow, the bite that would bring an end to his torment. But the blow never came. Instead, The lion let out a low grunt, almost a sigh, and then turned away. Its golden eyes for the last time met the grandson's, now filled with abject terror and incipient madness. There was no more judgment in them, only a cold resignation, as if to say, "Your punishment is your own mind. Live with it." And then the albino lion, the majestic and enigmatic creature, began to walk away. Its steps were silent, its white figure quickly blending into the night's mist, disappearing like a ghost into the darkness. It did not look back. Its mission was accomplished. The grandmother was safe, and the grandson, condemned to a hell far crueler than death. The grandson remained there alone, in the middle of the empty road, under the pale moonlight. The pain in his body was insignificant. The pain in his soul was an ocean. He tried to stand, but his legs would not obey him. He was broken, physically and mentally. The image of his grandmother dragging herself, the lament, the look of infinite sorrow, the hand that passed through his. Everything repeated in an infernal loop in his mind. He didn't know where to go. There was no car, no money, no hope. The road stretched infinitely ahead and behind, a corridor of darkness and torment. He was trapped there forever, with the shadow of his crime. The albino lion had granted him life, but a life that was the most terrible of punishments. A life of eternal regret, incessant guilt, silent madness. The night was long, and the penance even longer. And for him, the night would never end.